probably the two largest, bloodiest, and most influential revolutions in European history, the French and Russian revolutions weren't so different. In this segment, we will compare the similarities and differences of pre- and post-revolution France and Russia. The most important difference will be noted here. We are referencing the French Revolution of 1789, which was in France, and the Russian Revolution of 1917, which was in Russia, the October one. Both pre-revolutionary France and Russia had monarchies. In France, the monarch was the king. In Russia, the monarch was called the Tsar. Both King Louis XVI and Tsar Nicholas II weren't really cut out to be rulers. They didn't want to be rulers, and they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They both meant well, but they just didn't want to be kings. Both the French and Russian queens, incidentally, happened to be Germanic. Marie Antoinette, the French queen, and was the Archduchess of Austria. Tsarina Alexandra, the Russian queen, was from Germany. France and Russia were also suffering food shortages due to problems with the climate, unrest among the peasants, and crippling debt due to war. Another difference will be noted here. France had debt due to a tax system that had not been updated in over 100 years, and from assisting the American colonies in their Revolution War of Independence against the British in 1776. Russia had debt problems due to the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. Along with that war, Russia had also lost most of its navy, money, and respect for the Tsar. Back to the revolutions. The French Revolution was not incited by some weirdo from out of town, rather by several weirdos from downtown. In France, the king had tried to assemble the Estates General to try and solve the problems of debt and lack of food. However, the First and Second Estates made a plan to get rid of those filthy commoners. The Third Estate was kicked out, so no agreement to benefit them could be reached. Instead, they went to the nearest place that they could assemble, an indoor tennis court, and wrote a new doctrine, the Declaration of the Rights of Man. This was the first of several bits of legislation that they would write in the coming years. In Russia, it was a bit different. While the Tsar was out of town, protesters showed up at the imperial palace demanding food and other things. The guards, unsure what to do, fired on them, leading to what would be known as Bloody Sunday. A similar thing had happened in France. Several hundred angry peasant women arrived armed to the teeth at the palace at Versailles. But the king was home and said give them what they wanted. Back to Russia, the Tsar had abdicated to a provisional parliamentary government, and everything would have been fine if it hadn't been for good old Vladimir Lenin. The Germans who had been holding him decided it was a good idea to send him back to Russia so that he could cause problems there and consequently would be no longer a problem for them. Lenin stirred up the Bolsheviks, his party, had several protests and marches, and his supporters eventually overran the government's law enforcement. And in both France and Russia, the royal family was executed. During the revolution, revolutionaries also got rid of the old monsieur or madame in France, replacing it with citoyen, which is citizen. In Russia, of course, we're all told that they called each other comrade, and they did sometimes. But mostly, they used a variety of different titles that weren't Mr. or Mrs., because those were capitalist. They used lots of non-capitalist titles, including comrade, sometimes. So anyways, France had a reign of terror that was caused by the Committee of Public Safety, which I guess they're not very good at, which resulted in many, about 16,000, nobles having their heads removed. There was a similar movement in Russia, but that just sort of lasted during all of Stalin's reign. His equivalent to the Committee of Public Safety would have been his secret police, the KGB, who are estimated to have executed 62 million people during the course of the Soviet Union's existence. 49 million of those were likely during Stalin's reign. After the revolution in both France and Russia, figureheads of the revolution, Maximilien Robespierre and Vladimir Lenin, were executed by more radical members of the revolution. In Russia, the more radical guy who took over was Stalin, and he immediately turned it into a dictatorship, coining the famous phrase, "All comrades are equal, but some are more equal than others," as it was a communist society and everyone was supposed to be equal. In France, this wasn't the case. Robespierre was executed in 1794, but nothing like a dictator would come until 1799, 5 years later, when the famous Napoleon Terrier Bonaparte came into power, turned France into an empire, and established himself as emperor. Sure, he had a senate and all that stuff that ancient Rome had, but he was a dictator. They couldn't do anything without his approval. The Soviet Union was never really an empire, rather a political body, which made sure that the countries surrounding it did what they told them to. Since their respective revolutions, France and Russia have both greatly impacted world events, and their own events. France is currently on its fifth republic, and Russia's currency currently has the least monetary value in the world. Nonetheless, the world would be much different today without